Let me tell you just a little bit about myself as I launch into what I want to share with you this morning. I got saved when I was 16. My dad was in a business, a wholesale paper distribution business, and he started in the business working in the warehouse and held various positions, ultimately to end up owning the business. And when I graduated from high school, he and some partners bought 13 warehouse locations from Montana to Texas. And so as I headed into college, my thought was, I want to run my dad's business. I was a believer, and I had been encouraged by our pastor in the church to seek what God would want us to give our life to, a call to ministry, and I felt called to business, and specifically to run my dad's business. I went to a mentor friend of mine as I was graduating from college and said, what do I do? I majored in accounting because I was told that the highest percentage of corporate CEOs came from the finance side. So I knew that's where I wanted to go, so I majored in accounting. Well, then I got to thinking maybe I ought to sit the CPA exam and try public accounting for a little bit. And so I went to my mentor and I said, what's your recommendation? And he said, you owe your dad 2 years. And I said, okay. So I went to work for my dad, and that's what got us to Texas. They were based in Omaha, Nebraska. And all from the time I committed my life to the Lord, all through my 7 years in business with my dad, we were actively engaged in the life of the church, committed anything to serve, teach, minister, groups, fellowship, we were all in. And what I found when I moved into ministry is when I was in business, my work was separate from my ministry, and so if it was a bad day at work, I could enter into a ministry responsibility and walk away thinking, I think God loves me. I think God's pleased with me because He's blessing in this area even though this didn't go so good today. And when I moved into ministry, my work and my ministry lay on top of each other, and all of a sudden I found it difficult to separate those two. If my work wasn't going so good, maybe God wasn't so pleased, and if God wasn't so pleased, maybe my work wasn't going to go so good. And then I experienced something that I hadn't experienced when I was in the workplace, and that is, when I was in the workplace, not in vocational ministry, I felt like I could say no. So if I had an extra busy week, and I remember I was the pastor of the church, I was in leadership, and he wanted to introduce the leaders of the church, but I'd had a particularly busy week, and I wanted to go to a Cowboy game. So I didn't show up because I wanted to go to the Cowboy game. And I didn't tell him I wasn't going to show up, and he was ticked off because a bunch of leaders didn't show up. But when you get in ministry, you don't get that option more than once. So I was trying to think of what might describe what I felt as a young man coming into ministry. I felt like a young man in a Corvette Stingray when I stepped into ministry, didn't know a thing of what I was doing, and found that I could go a lot faster than I could control. Isn't that true? Has that been true for you? Maybe that's true even to today. When I think about the schedule and pace and demands of ministry, I think it's really hard not to live on the edge of being out of control. And I spoke this weekend here at the church about the whole idea of Sabbath, and I want to talk to us about that concept. For us as pastors, for us as leaders, of our church, the organization or ministry of the church. That's what I want to talk about. Now, I'm assuming that I don't have to give scriptural context, but because we are pastors, we need that, right? So let me just say, Exodus 20 and verse 8, let me use that as the springboard. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Now, we don't know. Let me just say, in all the years that I've been a part of the church, and especially the early years after I got saved, I was in a church that taught honoring the Sabbath. And the picture I had of honoring the Sabbath as a young believer was, if you're committed to God, you honor the Sabbath, and if you honor the Sabbath, that means you consume your life with church on Sunday. And so that's what we did. We went Sunday morning, we went Sunday night, we took a break, we filled it up with fellowship in between those activities. That's to me what a Sabbath was. And yet, over these years now, 32 years of ministry, I've come to realize that what God intended, I didn't fully grasp. When I don't know if when what the church was trying to model, if this is what they really represented. I mean, this is what they thought. When God was speaking of Sabbath, He was talking about an involvement of 1 day a week of your life totally consumed in service and ministry for God, or if there was something bigger. So I was thinking about this because I was 20 years in ministry, and I never thought about a day off. I used to talk about when I was in Amarillo. Jimmy Evans was my best friend, and we were partnered in ministry. And it seemed like to me that I had a much greater capacity for work than he did. I mean, he would preach, and then on Monday I wouldn't see him. And he was emotionally and physically spent. And I remember one day I was sitting in my office, and I heard the secretary, my office was right across from his office, and I heard the secretary come in to his office and say, so-and-so's on the phone and they would like to know if they can see you today. Is that possible? Well, I knew what his schedule was. I knew he had time available. And he said, oh, absolutely not. I'm packed today. There's no way I could talk to them. So the secretary came out of his office, came into my office. Well, my schedule was busier than his. And I could squeeze him in between this time and this time. And I thought to myself, so I... Okay. You lazy... But that's what I thought. I thought... If I got to carry part of your load and my load. So I told the secretary, I'll see him. And I did. So later that day, I went into his office and I said, why did you tell her that you didn't have time to see so-and-so? Because I know your schedule. And he said, well, Tom, my schedule is much more than the appointments that I have on my calendar. He said, my schedule reflects the priorities of my life and puts it in a system that becomes doable so that all the priorities of my life get managed. I had time in the context of I didn't have appointments, but I didn't have time unless I was going to steal it for something else that I was preparing for later in the week. It was the first time I understood the whole idea of time. There's a time and a purpose for everything, and there needs to be a self-management rather than just saying, if we're committed to God and we say yes, we do everything that comes along our way, and we pile it into a schedule as full as we can get, and then hope sometime we can renew our strength. I was thinking about this probably 10 years ago now. I was thinking about the whole idea of Sabbath because I was 20 years in ministry before I ever got a sabbatical. Jimmy took a sabbatical when about the 10-year mark. He came back. He was gone for 8 weeks. He came back and he said, "Oh, Tom, you ought to have one of these. They are fantastic." And I thought, yeah, it'd be nice. Well, okay, so 20 years I'm doing. Then when I make the move to Gateway, we had there was an understanding of Sabbath and sabbatical, and we had a culture. So I was beginning to learn. I'd been learning about time and scheduling and priorities and things like that. And I was beginning to understand in a greater way about sabbatical. So I had an appointment to meet a guy at Starbucks. And when I got there early, I opened up my laptop, and on the Starbucks website, when I opened my laptop, was a TED Talk from a designer in New York on Sabbath. I thought, well, this is interesting, 17 minutes. So I clicked on it while I was waiting for this guy to come, and this designer talked about planning your life, about what he recognized was their design work would become less and less creative over a 6-year period, and until they were just refreshing old ideas. And he said, so he said he wasn't particularly a religious man, but he decided that he was going to take a year and close his design studio and all the employees, and they were going to recreate themselves. And this was the logic that he used. That was so captivating to me. From birth to 22 years, we are preparing. We're preparing with experience and education and all kinds of things. And then from 23 to 65, we produce. These are our producing years. And then from 65, if we are the average, until 80, we party. And we tell ourselves, while we are killing ourselves with the pace and the work of life, that the party's coming, you're going to get to enjoy. And what we know by reality is many people, by the time they get here, they're physically worn out. They're not in any condition to enjoy these years. They're many times, they don't live as long as they could have lived if they would have paced themselves a little different. So this Steven Segmeister is the designer, and what he did is he said, I came up with this idea. He said, I divided this into 7-year increments. And he said, every 7 years, I'm going to take 1 year of sabbatical. And that means that I'm going to push my retirement to 70. So I'm going to shorten these party years, but by shortening these party years, I'm going to put a party year in my production years. Do you get it? And I'm watching this video and I think, that is so cool. He borrowed from these retirement years and put it in his producing years and actually made his producing years more productive by doing that. And then I thought, that's ridiculous. Who can do that? We're not going to shut the church down for a year and say, everybody come back in a year, we're taking a sabbatical this year. There'd be no church left, right? Everybody else would have filtered someplace, or nobody would be serving God, or, that'd be the thought. So one day I was thinking about this and thinking, how do you teach this? How do you apply this other than looking at a guy and go, well, that's nice. And I started doing the math, and if you count the number of days, 365 days in 7 years, and if you took 1 day a week as a rest day in those 7 years, so 52 days times 7, it totals the party year. And all of a sudden I go, God, you're brilliant. You knew if you said, I want you to take a year every 6 years, we couldn't do it. So you built it into a system that's a weekly system, and you say, honor me. Take 1 day a week and rest. Now, as I started looking at this, so you look at the issue of sabbatical, and the first piece of sabbatical is rest. That's 1 day in 7. Then there's the renewal piece, and that's the sabbatical 1 year in 7. And then there is the recovery or reconciliation, and that is the year of Jubilee, or the 50th year. When you look at the concept of Sabbath, God was saying, there's components that I never understood. There's components that are to be built into the process and the mindset of sabbatical. And the first is, you need to rest. You need to cease from your labors. You need to take a day and just rest. Then you need to take on a recurring basis, you need to renew yourself. Now, so the first sabbatical I took was at 20 years of ministry, and I was still in Amarillo, still at Trinity Fellowship, and my oldest son was living in New Zealand. And so we took 3 weeks, and we went to visit him in New Zealand. And while I was there, I wrote my first book about fathering, Influence of a Father. So I would wake up in the morning, I'd have my quiet time, and then around 8 o'clock, I would start writing. And I'd write from 8 until 12:30, and then spend the afternoon. By 12:30, my mind was kind of mushy, and so I'd spend the afternoon and evening with our daughter-in-law and Jan, and then when Todd got home, with him. I did that for 3 weeks, and during those 3 weeks, I wrote 10 of the 15 chapters that became a part of the book. Well, when I got to Gateway, and I thought, well, that's kind of what you do on a sabbatical. You kind of focus your attention, you study or you write or you do something like that. Well, when I got to Gateway, I was been there for a couple of years, and Robert said, when was the last time you had a sabbatical? And I said, it's about 5 years. And he said, good, this is your sabbatical year. We give our executive team a sabbatical every 5 years, so I want you to plan to take a sabbatical. And I said, well, okay. I said, that's good, because I've got another idea for a book. He said, whoa, 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 whoa. You're not writing a book on your sabbatical. And I said, I'm not? And he said, no. And you're not speaking, and and he starts naming, and you're not answering emails. And so what am I going to do? He said, you're going to renew yourself. I didn't understand what renewing myself was. And he said, here's what I want you to do. Do you know of anybody? Do you have a place you could go and get away? And I said, well, my sister has a lake house. And he said, talk to your sister and see if you can go and stay in her lake house. And your sabbatical is 4 weeks, and if you want, you can extend it to 6 by taking 2 weeks of vacation. And while you're gone, we're going to reassign your work. we're going to change your email address. We're going to change the SIM card in your cell phone. And so you'll have a new cell number, and you can give it out to your family member and to me and to a few of the elders. But people that know your cell number are not going to be able to get a hold of you. So you need to change your message on your cell phone that says, I'm on sabbatical and I won't be back until such and such time. If you need help, contact my assistant. Well, I did that. And I'll just say, so I took a few days to close down our house. I went to my sister's lake house with my wife, and I got into a routine. Wake up in the morning, have my quiet time. I'm the early riser. Jan gets up a little later, so I'd get up, have my quiet time. Then I'd go for a run. Then I'd come back and cool down, and I'd be back in the living room just kind of reading and things. When she got up, we'd take whatever time, 45 minutes or an hour, and just talk about things. Talk about our kids, talk about things about life and things like that. And the pace of our life did not allow that kind of relaxed conversation about anything. And about the third week in the sabbatical, we're out in the living room, we're talking about something, and it came up. I said, what do you want to do today? I'm a planner, organizer person, and it gotten to the point where in sabbatical you don't have any responsibilities, you don't have anybody to answer to, there's nobody looking for you. Planning had just fallen off the radar. It's like, what do you want to do today? And when I did that, she said, hey, I know you. And I said, what do you mean you know me? She said, I just saw for the first time in a long time the guy that I married. Something was being renewed that couldn't be renewed in rest, that was being renewed in a season of rest. And it is literally just like we experience when we plant a field. If we overplant a field, planting it in the same crop over and over again without giving that field a break, the productivity, the nutrients of the soil are all used up and the productivity of the field goes down. It was the most incredible thing. So I've had two now since I've been there. And I'll just tell you, the first 2 weeks of every sabbatical are the most disorienting time in life. Because what I realize in those 2 weeks is how much my identity is wrapped up in the things that I do, the people that I know, the people that know me or need me, and when all of a sudden that is cut off, I find myself feeling like I'm free falling. Who am I? What am I doing? And it is one of the things when you talk about being renewed, it's one of the things that is the most incredible things, because it takes about 2 weeks, and I would say those 2 weeks are detox weeks. You're free falling. I'm dealing with insecurities. What if they figure out they don't need me? You know, because all my work's been assigned. What if they don't like me when I come back? Obviously, nobody likes me because nobody's calling me to check on me. I'm feeling sorry for myself. God, do you still like me? You know, all of that. This renewal piece is a absolutely unbelievable piece of God's work. The Jubilee year, you know, if you've ever taught on the year of Jubilee and you've encouraged people, everything's forgiven, you know, God is restoring things that were lost or stolen. There is a Jubilee for us, but think of it this way, if it's every 50 years, I mean, we ought to celebrate our 50th birthday like a big dog. It's a Jubilee year, and not many of us are going to make it to the second Jubilee. So this whole thing is big in the heart of God as an issue of rest. When we talk about rest, these are the things we're talking. So here's what I found in sabbatical and in the issue of rest. A sabbatical is simply an extension of rest itself. So here's 4 things that are a part of rest, and then extended in a greater fashion in sabbatical. The first is renewal. When we're talking to our team about Sabbath, and about sabbatical, what we're saying is we want you to unplug from your daily responsibilities. Well, what can I do on a Sabbath? I mean, what are you saying? Well, we don't define a Sabbath as a quiet time. We're assuming you have a quiet time every day. So it's not having a quiet time. If that's a part of your routine, and it should be, then just maintain that routine. It's renewing. Say no to the things that you do in work. What do you do in work? I answer emails. I study for teaching. I counsel or minister to people. Say no to those things. And as you say no to those things, so here's the challenge for all of us in ministry. If you get to the place of saying, okay, I can say no, then you have to have a team around you that says, it's okay for you to say no, and we'll pick up the slack. We have to give ourselves permission, and then we have to, the team has to come alongside us and understand that, it's your Sabbath? Okay, I got it. You rest. I'll take care of this. If we can get by the feeling guilty ourselves, then the next hurdle we have to get over if we're going to really implement this in our life is we have to build the vision in our team. And here's what I found. If it's equally applied, it'll be equally supported. So if everybody, if it's good for one, it's good for all. So if my Sabbath day is not your Sabbath day, I can support your Sabbath day and you can support my Sabbath day, and we're not competing. And I'm not getting my Sabbath day on your back. We're sharing because this is a value that is a scriptural, biblical value that God does. It's renewal. Unplug from your daily responsibilities and use whatever resources that you have to pursue the idea of renewal. So here's another way we define renewal. If it is draining, don't do it. I don't mean physically draining. I mean on a sabbatical day, if I love to mow the yard. I mean, I love to be outside. I love the activity in the yard. And so I may get tired from doing something I'm doing, but it renews me. It changes the focus of things. And so it's not to not be tired, it's to be renewed. If there's somebody that interrupts you, something that interrupts you, and you can feel instantly that it's draining the life out of you, stop it. Build a hedge against it, because it will rob you from the rest that God intends. Here's the second thing. Review. Consider the validity of things that you're interested in. Review the things that you've wanted to do, the things that you've set aside and you've been unable to do because time wouldn't permit. Maybe it's studying a particular subject. You're not studying to teach anything. It's not a part of the responsibility. It's just something that you've wanted to press into God about. Maybe you've wanted to learn a new language. You've had the Rosetta Stone software set aside, but you don't have time. Learn the new language in your review time. Here's the third thing, rest. Take a nap. Sleep in late. Allow your mind to wander. Don't, you know how, have you ever, has your mind, maybe it still is today, been in that place where you're so engaged, you wake up thinking, what have I got to do today? What's my next assignment? What have I got to do? When's the next teaching that I've got to prepare? How soon do I have to have that in? And then the worst thing ever is you wake up and you've been traveling, and even though you're home in your own bed, you go, where am I? What city is this? What am I supposed to do now? What is? Rest. I'm home, I'm in my own bed, and I don't have anything to do today. Okay, rest. And here's the fourth thing, restructure. Sabbath needs a gracious, not a legalistic structure. But here's what I know, without a plan, God has nothing to work with, and the benefits that would result from rest are robbed. So, make a plan. Now, here's what I want to do is I want to say, so this is the foundation. When we talk about a Sabbath, we really want everyone on our team, and not just the paid staff of the church, but this is, I'm now going to focus on that particular thing. But here's what we believe. We do a lot of things as pastors to establish to break the resistance for the rest of the congregation to follow behind, right? So what we're establishing in this pattern for our life, we're establishing in such a way that we want our staff to follow, and then as the staff follows, we want the congregation to follow too, so that every person understands the significance of what God has determined for us. It's not a legalistic law that He wants to hammer us with. It's something that He invites us into and says, don't miss the rest that I've determined for you. If you're weary and heavy laden, come to me. I intend this for you. The most incredible thing about what God does for us is, though He has a pile of blessings in this thing that He calls Sabbath, if we don't want to, He's not going to make us. We have to set the schedule in order to be able to do this. So, here's some practical things that we do. We teach and we reinforce via our oversight the idea of a day of rest. So, we're friends, we're in ministry together, and we monitor what each other's doing. And if, hey, you've been on for about 7 or 8 days, haven't you? You were involved in the conference this many days, and then you had those 2 nights out of ministry, and when's your day of rest? I didn't get one. Well, when was the last one that you got? Well, it's been 3 weeks. Okay, stop. It's an accountability because it's a care. And when we say we believe it, we say we believe it enough that we'll change something in order to make it possible for you to get a day of rest. So we teach it. Then we establish the sabbatical policy. And when we formalized the sabbatical policy through our elder board, and we talked a lot about it. And when the conversations first began, the discussion among our elders was, well, gee, it's great for you, but I mean, it'd be nice if we could do this, but I can't do that. So you have to, when you're contending for it, you do have to understand that maybe do we believe that this is enough of something we modeled that we're going to establish the policies and procedures that reinforce the process? We said through that process, yes. So we said, well, what is it? Well, we're going to give a 4 weeks of sabbatical. We're going to give it every 7 years for our ministry team. And they can increase it to 6 by taking 2 weeks of their vacation. Then we started gathering some books on Sabbath, and we would give the books to the guys that were going on sabbatical so that they'd understand what rest was all about. Then we started, having read the books ourselves, then we started highlighting, this is what we mean by rest and this is what we don't want you to do. And then we started formalizing it by saying, okay, we're going to change your email address, and we're going to reassign your responsibilities so that when you come back, your desk isn't piled up with stuff that you've got to now spend the next 4 or 5 months catching up on. But what this means is there may be decisions that are made in your absence that you're going to have to live with when you get back. Now, to the best of our ability, we're not going to delay a decision until you're gone so that we can push by something that you have not wanted to do. If it can wait, if it's a major decision and it can wait, it'll wait. But if it can't, we're going to make the decision as best we think possible, and you're going to have to trust that God's in charge. Because remember, the whole idea of Sabbath takes faith. It took faith for the children of Israel to acknowledge the Sabbath in the wilderness, that God was going to provide enough. It takes the same faith for us that God will provide enough. So, every 7 years. Well, then we looked at our senior leadership team, and we said, the level of demand on them is just a little higher than our ministry team, and so we backed that down and said we want them to take it every 5 years. Then, what has developed now over these 10 years is we actually, when a person is in their sabbatical year, their admin sends out an email saying it's Tom's year for sabbatical, and if you'd like to write him a letter, a sabbatical letter, if you'll send it to me, we'll accumulate them. And then we put together a sabbatical book for every person going away. And the book has letters from family members and friends and staff, and it's all about, hey, we're praying for you and wishing you the best, and this is what your life has meant to me, and we want you to be renewed in this time away. I tell you, I didn't think of it. I should have brought my book from the last one I had. It was such an amazing blessing. If any of you guys have been on a quest, and you have the Saturday day when you get this envelope of letters of people that have written, it's that overwhelming when you're on sabbatical, that people are expressing their support and their love for you. So these are all things that have developed over the years as we've implemented this, and we've learned what to do and what not to do. So we back down from that sabbatical thing and say, well, what other things could we do that would support this process? And so we said, we are not going to allow people to accumulate more than a week of carryover vacation, because we want you to take your full vacation. If you're entitled to 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, we want you to take that vacation because it's a part of the process of rest when you're not in a sabbatical year. So you can't carry it over. And then what happened is, with busy schedule, guys wouldn't take it, and then they get right up to the end of the year and they want the whole month of December off. No, now we're going to have to manage your vacation a little better to make sure that it's spaced out during the process of the year. We then backed from there and said, well, how do we make sure that we have a healthy staff that reflects a culture of rest, the way we do it is we say, we're going to give you, for every job at Gateway Church, we have a job description, even the volunteer jobs. And we state on the job description, and when we're talking to the person about the job, that this job can be done in less than 50 hours a week. We expect it to be around 45 hours. But, so less than 50, not more than 2 nights a week, with 2 days off a week. And we will structure your schedule so that can take place. If you have weekend responsibilities, we'll give you a day off during the week, so that you can have 1 day to mow your yard and pay your bills and play golf or pursue your hobby, and you can have 1 day for rest. We built it into the policies and procedures, and so now Gateway, at Easter this year, we were 14 years old. So we've had it for probably 10 or maybe 11 years. The policy's been developing, and this year we looked at rolling it out to all of our staff. The question came up, if this is good for our ministry team, why isn't it good for everybody? And we thought, well, to be consistent, it needs to be. So we had our HR department look and say, how many, if we were to roll this out to all of our staff, how many would be entitled to a sabbatical this year? And it was 90. So we said, we need to figure out how to stagger this in, because we're staggered by that amount. And but my point is, it started as a ministry thing, and it now has our attention to the point that we are going to roll it out to all of our staff, because it's a principle that we want to live and adopt for life, and we want to model it in a way that people will say, well, I can do that too. We have now a smattering. We started a business ministry this year, and Steve Doolin, who was a business leader and an elder of the church, sold his business, came on our staff to build and develop this ministry to business leaders. Well, Steve had always, as a part of his business life, had as long as I've known him, had sabbatical as a part of his routine. He would take at least 2 sabbaticals a year, week-long sabbaticals. So we're encouraging, and we're having a few of our business leaders now implement that discipline into their life, and then observing the blessing and benefit it has in their businesses. So this is a big deal, and this is a rhetorical statement. It's not even a question, I guess. If in a group this size, it's been my experience that if there were 1 or 2 that had a sabbatical or even a sabbatical policy, it would be unusual. I realize that what I'm presenting, and you go, well, I don't know if we don't have anything like that. I don't know if my board would go along with that. I'm not sure. Can I ask you to do one thing? Resist the temptation of saying, well, yeah, if we were Gateway Church and we had what Gateway has. It's not about size. If you think that, then show me in Scripture where it says, when you get to be a certain size, you get to honor the Sabbath. But until you get to be that size, you have to work like a dog. It's not there. And just like I was saying with our staff, the bigger you get doesn't make it easier to exert the faith. It still takes faith.